settle down, everybody. That was a beautiful speech, and it's gonna be a tough one to follow. I did have a rap planned for my speech, but I didn't realize that the best man who went before me was also going to do one. Guess we should have coordinated that at the rehearsal. And his was much better than mine too. So I'm gonna skip that part of my speech and kind of just go to this part here. Let's see if I can read my own handwriting. Wikipedia describes a wedding as a ceremony where two people are united in marriage. And I am so glad we could all be united here today. So please, everyone, will you raise your glass, and if I can leave you with any words of wisdom, it's to marry someone you can be stuck in quarantine with. Cheers. A wedding is one beautiful day that takes hundreds of hours to plan and execute. It often takes thousands of dollars and dozens of people to pull off. They often involve a combination of small business employment, event planning, and tourism draw. And in Muskoka, although you may not always see them around, they are everywhere. At least they were. Because this wedding season, they might be a little harder to spot. This is Jess Kramer, and you're listening to The Plunge, Muskoka in Pandemic, a 6-part miniseries exploring COVID-19 in Muskoka, how we are adjusting, and what we can expect as summer fast approaches. This week, I'm plunging into Muskoka's wedding industry, looking into everything that goes into a wedding in Muskoka, the people who are a part of it, and what this summer means for it. For this episode, I'm focusing on the behind-the-scenes aspects of weddings, the linguistics of putting a day together. There are podcasts entirely dedicated to weddings and marriage, but what I want to just focus on for mine is Muskoka and how people here are putting them together. In 2017, there were 650 marriage licenses issued throughout the municipalities in Muskoka. We can't pinpoint exactly where and how each of those certificates were distributed, but it's not a stretch to estimate that there are about 600 weddings per year that happen in Muskoka. Most of those are performed between May and October. And on any given weekend within that time frame, there are easily a dozen weddings taking place in Muskoka. Between resorts, backyards, cottages, and elopements in the forest, there are plenty of romantic places to tie the knot. Most of the weddings happening here are for people who don't actually live in Muskoka. Couples often come from Toronto and throughout southern Ontario. But we often also get people coming from BC, the US, parts of Europe, and even Asia. In Ontario, the average number that people tend to throw around for the cost of a wedding is $30,000. With Muskoka acting as more of a destination wedding location, people who come here to get married are generally spending a bit more. And those budgets get distributed to a ton of different businesses. They have to pay the location, the caterer, the flowers, the decorator, the altar, the officiant, the photographer, the dress, the suits, the DJ, the cake, just to name a few. Then you have options like, do you want to have an outdoor tent rental, chairs, a bus transportation, videographer, live music? The list goes on. Bryn Armstrong is a wedding and event planner in Muskoka. She owns Primp and Prop Event Co., where she specializes in events and smaller intimate weddings. I spoke to her a couple weeks ago, and she told me just how much weddings, any gathering really, affect our economy and tourist industry. Here she is.
There's so many ancillary spending and ancillary events that happen around weddings that bring in a ton of money for Muskoka. If you just think about the aspects of, for example, a 120-person wedding that's outdoor. That one wedding employs rental companies, hotels and accommodation, florists, photographers, food and beverage, local artisans, they require transportation, the list goes on. There's, outside of that, a lot of the guests are coming up for an extended period of time. They're not necessarily just coming up for the wedding. They're here for a weekend or for a week. So there's all of that spending that is happening in our area for that extended stay as well. It's a huge, huge impact on Muskoka and the tourism industry, I think. Every time that you're hosting a gathering, so I think they're uniquely entwined and knitted together. So if we're not hosting events, if we're not having events, if they're being postponed into 2021 or into the latter part of 2020, that funding and that money is just, it's nowhere to be found in Muskoka. People are at a bit of a standstill.
We'll come back to Bryn and her business a little later, but I want to introduce you to another wedding planner named Holly Matrimony. She's been working as a wedding planner in Muskoka for over 10 years, and she tends to specialize in planning more of those large wedding weekends, the ones that bring in 80-plus guests and last from Friday night till Sunday afternoon.
So I'm Holly Matrimony, and as much as I wish that Matrimony was my last name, it's Carney. So Matrimony was a nickname. Holly Matrimony was a nickname that was given to me over 10 years ago when I was trying to come up with a name for the business, and it stuck, so which is great. So yeah, I've been doing it for over 10 years, 10 years full-time and 5 years in addition to that part-time, and it's been awesome, but it's been quite the journey, and at sort of coming up to this 10-year mark now, I'm looking at reinventing sort of how I plan and coordinate weddings in Muskoka, and that will be sort of a change to serve everyone instead of just my handful of 20 to 30 clients a year. Yeah, it's been a lot of fun. It's been a lot of stress. I have a lot of gray hair that I didn't have 10 years ago, but I've been fortunate enough to meet so many amazing people in terms of clients and wedding vendors.
Holly was telling me that a lot of people don't want to take away from their summer vacation, so they won't always get married in July or August. Instead, they'll do it in what she referred to as the shoulder season, which is May, June, and then September, October. Some resorts, such as Severn Lodge, which you heard me talk about in the last episode, do not actually host weddings in July or August because they're so busy with tourists anyway. But hosting weddings during those shoulder months are really important for resorts because it helps them bring in some good revenue during a time when less people will be vacationing. The entire wedding party will probably stay at the resort all weekend, as well as a lot of the guests. People plan weddings years in advance in order to get the venue they want. Right now, a lot of venues and vendors in Muskoka already have most of their 2021 wedding season booked up. Muskoka's a dream spot to have a wedding for many people. Here's Holly again.
Muskoka is a destination wedding for a lot of people, even though they have really tight connections to the area. They're coming from all over. They choose to, of all the places they could possibly get married, and they're choosing Muskoka to get married. So just the stories involved with that, and the meaning, and the emotion behind photos and the videos and the whole experience. Not just one day. We're planning a wedding weekend where people are coming and checking out of life and reality for Friday, Saturday kind of thing, and leaving Sunday. And what we see on Friday, they end up being a totally different person on Sunday. Everyone's rushing up on Friday and they're all stressed out, and by Sunday you can't kick them out of their resorts or cottages and stuff fast enough because they don't want to leave. So it's awesome to be part of such a cool spot, only a couple hours north of the city, but people fly in here, or people they just come from all over.
In Muskoka, we're used to seasonal work. It's our bread and butter. We work really, really hard all summer, then cozy up in the winter. The Ontario wedding industry in general works the same way. People are still getting married throughout the year, but ask any vendor when their busy season is, and they'll say May to October. In her peak season, Holly said she was doing 40 to 50 weddings per year and still having to turn down clients because it was too much to take on. When couples come up from the city to get married, they sometimes source local vendors, photographers, hair and makeup, suit rentals, and such. But I should point out that people who come here to get married from out of town will sometimes still bring vendors who they love from the city. Part of a wedding planner's job is to help source vendors. It involves knowing what all the options are, their price points, their quality, their style. Does that style and quality fit with what the couple wants? Then a lot of organization to make sure everything plays out. After 10 years and anywhere from 200 to 300 weddings planned, Holly's slowly turning her attention and business to creating a center where she can focus on showcasing local vendors. A place where couples can go to chat about their dream day and see everything that's available, being wedding vendors and venues in Muskoka.
They're planning in the off season, so if I could get them to come up the highway and meet at a center that is year round, if they wanted to, like they could book their planning day. Any of the vendors who don't have, like any of the venues even that are closed down, but they can't do venue tours, but they can show up to the center, right? They have their private meeting room that's like Muskoka and fun, and they can have their, they can enjoy some of the things that they can't experience in the off season, which is, John's Bakery scones or whatever, like Muskoka Ginger Ale and, or Muskoka Roastery coffee. Like we can just celebrate the shit out of the area and make the right environment. So if I'm in Gravenhurst and I have this space here, then people should be able to come and be able to jump off from any point here, right? Or people be able to come in and meet with them there. A freelance hair and makeup artist, and so they don't have studios they're operating out of because it's all mobile hair and makeup. And so if you don't have a cottage here and you're getting married at a resort, then the clients are stuck coming up and renting a room for the night so that they have space or a spot for you to come and do their hair and makeup trial. So why not then have space for them to be able to come and do their hair and makeup trial? Like there's so many uses, I think, for that space that warrant it being a physical location.
The wedding industry in general is very neat. At least I think it's really neat. I've been working in it as a videographer for 4 years, as I believe I've mentioned a few times now in the series. Shameless self-promotion, am I right? And it's neat how, especially in a smaller place like Muskoka, you often find yourself seeing the same people from one wedding to another. You might go to the same resort or location a few times per year, see the same florists, caterers, DJs, officiants, planners or photographers. In Muskoka, we all want to try to support local businesses, and that's why I think the idea of Holly's Center is kind of neat. Besides wedding shows that just happen annually, I can't really think of another place or seen this being done.
Thank you all for being here on this happy occasion. We're gathered here today to join two amazing people.
When you think about it, big weddings are kind of a great excuse for family reunions and opportunities for old friends to get together. But not every wedding that happens in Muskoka is necessarily a big wedding weekend or long blowout. We get a lot of couples who come up here to elope in the forest or have a tiny intimate wedding at their cottages or by the water. Those are the kinds of weddings that Bryn Armstrong, who you heard speak earlier, tends to plan. Here she is to explain a little bit about her business.
We focus on small, intimate events, with the bulk of those being weddings. So Primp and Pop was actually born and conceptualized when my now husband and I got engaged and started thinking about our own wedding. At that point, I had been planning, I'm going to call them traditional weddings, and had been in the wedding industry for over 10 years. I loved what I did, but realized quickly that what I was planning for other couples wasn't really necessarily for us. We had recently purchased a house, we had welcomed a dog into our lives, and we were actually expecting our first baby that same year. So when all of that kind of came to head, I decided to shift my focus to smaller, more intimate weddings, namely elopements, micro weddings, and pop-up weddings. So essentially we provide all-inclusive wedding packages that provide couples with the flexibility to customize and completely personalize their day, but without the stress of planning and pulling together those necessary pieces and details on their own.
Just last week, Bryn was able to help execute her first elopement of the year, where the couple got married by a waterfall. Because those can be performed with only 5 people present while still upholding social distancing. But the pop-up ceremonies that Primp and Prop had planned in July and August have been postponed until next year. They still have one planned for September that might be able to happen. Pop-up ceremonies, although smaller, do still involve a lot of people coming through one location. The micro weddings that they host also still involve between 15 to 30 guests. So a lot of her clients who have had micro weddings booked for the spring and early summer have had to be put on hold. For elopement and pop-up ceremonies, people are generally not booking 1 to 2 years in advance, like with bigger weddings. Bryn usually takes her bookings 4 to 6 months prior. Here's a little bit of mine and Bryn's conversation. Like, with the pop-up weddings, they're so much smaller than, like your regular traditional weddings. Do you see, like, less of them getting canceled? Do you see more of a, like, chance of them being able to go through because there's less people involved?
That is the hope. So I really do wish that I had a crystal ball, like many people do in this scenario. I wish we knew, but in speaking with other industry professionals, it seems like a lot of couples are deciding to postpone into 2021. For our couples, because we are in that unique position and we are such a smaller group, those who have booked with us for elopements, currently right now, their wedding can still happen because they have a maximum of 5 people. It's the couple getting married, the officiant, the photographer, and myself, or it's the couple and 2 witnesses. With our micro weddings and pop-up wedding couples, there's that, glimmer of residual hope that restrictions will relax a little bit, and over the next few weeks or months, that gatherings for that 20 to 30 people mark will be allowed. So, yeah, I'm hopeful. There's a lot of people in the wedding industry that are hopeful.
How, if you've been talking to any of your clients, like, how are they how do you find, like, the couples are dealing with uncertainty?
Our couples have literally been champions. Everyone seems to be rolling with the punches, remaining hopeful, and, are also sharing that they're open to shifting plans as necessary and looking to the government for updates, and as mandates change on what is acceptable, they're open to rolling with the punches. But I think because everyone's in the same scenario, it's slightly comforting in knowing that everyone's in the same boat, and we're just holding on to that glimmer of hope that this is going to end at some point. There are shifting perspectives and there are decisions to be made, but there's also a lot of options. So I think everyone that I have spoken with, whether it's in the wedding industry or it's our couples, they've really been remaining hopeful and have been quite resilient.
I contacted Bryn again a couple days ago, and she said they continue to get inquiries for next year, and that the couples still remain hopeful that weddings planned in the late summer and fall might still be able to happen. But it's really a day-to-day process, and it's important that the couples, who are dealing with a lot right now, do what's best for them. But she did tell me about this package they just released that's available as kind of a counterpart to the pop-up ceremony days, and instead are called elopement days. The first will be held at Del Monte in the Pines on July 3rd. Couples will get married in an elopement fashion, then run away with a picnic basket full of yummy local goodies. They also have the option to add video and live stream if they want to include any of their family and friends virtually. It's a neat alternative for couples who originally had big weddings planned and need to cancel or postpone. They can get married now and party later when it's safe. We don't really know what's going to happen with weddings that have been planned this summer and into the fall. As a vendor myself, I can say most people are still just sitting on their dates. I've had only a couple couples move their dates until next year. As vendors and venues, we can't give back our deposits. Unfortunately, most of us have either spent it in the off-season or needed to get by. However, given these circumstances, every vendor or venue I've spoken to has allowed for wedding dates to be moved without any extra fee. But it means no new bookings for us until 2021. So how are these vendors holding up? People who rely on weddings to bring in 50 to 100% of their income. How do they have to adjust to this year and onward? More on that after the break. So don't go away. The Plunge will be right back after this brief intermission.
Okay, I got this. If pineapple were a fruit, what would you call it?
Pineapple is a fruit.
Copy that, yeah. Right. Well, I feel like a lot of people would be like, I don't know. It'd be like, it is a fruit. But you were a bit sharper than that, which I'm surprised, to be honest.
Welcome back to The Plunge. Let's dive in. Muskoka's seasonal. We all know that. Weddings are seasonal too. So they fit right in with the Muskoka mentality of work, work, work all summer until you drop in the fall and then take winter to regroup. This year, though, we've had our winter break, we're all recouped, ready to get back to work, but we don't know if there will be work. In terms of weddings, couples still don't know if they'll be able to go through with them. And some are playing it safe and just postponing until next year altogether. Having to worry about a wedding for a couple puts a lot more stress onto a time that's already really stressful. For vendors and venues, they still have to plan for the possibility of working a wedding, even though it might not happen. Take Kate Hood, for example. She's a full-time photographer. She owns Kate Hood Photography, and for the past decade, she's sustained pretty much her entire living off of photographing weddings. In the past few years, though, she's sort of shifted her photography focus onto more of a doc style, as well as boudoir sessions and family portraits. Here she is.
My name is Kate Hood, and I am a photographer in Muskoka, generally specializing in portraits for the most part, and in the past, lots of weddings. I, as mentioned, shoot primarily portraits now. I've been in business about 10, almost 12 years, I guess, kind of in the Muskoka and North area. For a long time, I did weddings primarily. So at the height of my wedding business, I was shooting about 25 a year, and then adjusted packages and adjusted some particularities, and on average was shooting maybe 12 or so a year, mostly in cottage country. Over the past, I would say 3 years now, I've focused more on kind of documentary families and boudoir or intimate portraits.
For her, these past few months have been really weird. At this point, she's rescheduled all her portrait and boudoir shoots for April and May, and all the ones she's booked in June and onward are still on the calendar. Kate told me they probably won't make the call to reschedule any of these until a week or two prior. The whole thing has been a slow progression for her, because this is normally the time of year where work would start to pick up, for her and other photographers. Wedding season is starting up, and the warm weather is when families tend to schedule their outdoor portraits. At this point, while the province talks about reopening the economy and others begin to think about heading back to work, photographers still don't know when they'll be able to shoot. Some bylaws say they can shoot so long as they're at a certain distance, but in total, there's not a whole lot of clarification from the province on when they might be allowed to shoot. Because photography is a more intimate craft than we often think it is. And when photographers work with their clients, they want to make sure everyone is as comfortable as possible so they can pose properly and look their best.
It's hard to wrap my head around when we'll all feel better about the exchange of germs or the groups of people or the individual visit. So when I shoot families or women, I'm visiting with little babies and I get to snuggle little babies. Or, when I'm shooting families, I'm asking them to all be very close to one another. So I just spoke to a client who is scheduled for the end of June. We're going to leave that on the calendar. However, it's her partner, and their extended family. So it's a larger session. And that group of people aren't seeing each other regularly right now. So a couple of people are doing the grocery shopping, but they're not hugging and kissing, and there's a lot of that closeness in these kind of family portraits that I do. Or when I shoot intimate portraits of couples or women, I'm very close when I'm taking portraits of people and that sort of thing. So I hope that there comes a time soon where we feel better about being physically close to clients and clients being physically close to one another. But, the virus isn't going away. And so I struggle with that on a daily basis, wondering at what point are we going to let down our guard, and are we going to? And I just really don't know. Everything is so different, and it feels different. So I think it will continue to affect how we do business, or when we all start doing business, how we approach situations. And I haven't photographed anyone in person since January, I've just been, well, my family, I photographed that a little bit, but I've been doing virtual sessions, so I haven't seen anyone in person. I've just spoken to people, re-planned sessions, and right now we all say, okay, well, let's keep it on the schedule, and we'll chat a couple of days, a week before that, and see what the regulations are, and see how you feel about your family, but we're just taking it very, very slowly right now.
Kate says she's been trying out virtual sessions the past little while, and has actually really enjoyed them, more than she thought.
As mentioned, I have been shooting virtual sessions, which are very different. So I've had an opportunity to be very creative and do things that I wouldn't normally even consider doing. Shooting in different ways, different angles, different kinds of direction. Sure. So I've done two kinds. I've done family sessions, and I've done the boudoir or intimate sessions. So essentially, I was not the person to come up with this, but had seen a few boudoir photographers doing this online and tiptoed into it very slowly. I wasn't sure how it was going to feel. It's still such a weird concept for clients when they're inquiring. But essentially, we use cell phones or an iPad. Cell phones usually have the best camera. We connect via FaceTime or Zoom, and we set up their camera. I say we because I'm directing it, but they set up their camera in whatever space we're going to shoot in, and I'm able to capture either screenshots through Zoom or with FaceTime, it's an actual photo that gets sent to my device from theirs over Wi-Fi. And with babies, it's been great to sort of see new babies and snuggle and photograph. There's usually two parents in that space, so we have a bit more control over how we're holding the camera or where it's being put. And then with intimate sessions, we do it whenever we have time, but we try and do a few different rooms, a few different outfits, a few different placements of the camera, but sessions are about an hour. And essentially, I just direct the client during the session to pose as I normally would, and then we move the camera around and we try different angles and we go from there. It's a funny, weird option for people, and I'm enjoying it way more than I anticipated I would. But I mean, I miss the kind of photography that really fills me up creatively, which is about interacting with my clients, seeing their reaction in person, showing them photos on the back of the camera, and watching relationships blossom when it comes to little kids and parents, and, getting to see those things in person.
For someone who's doing photography full-time like Kate, there are not many other options for work other than virtual sessions at this time. And as she said, even though she misses the actual intimacy of photographing people in person, she has been challenged in a new way and kind of likes it. Now, let's talk about another business owner, someone else who works primarily in weddings.
My name is Tanya List, and what I do is I just do flowers and design for weddings and kind of larger events in town. I'm not like an everyday florist. I just do strictly weddings and events, which means I only have usually about 4.5 months to have my entire year's income come in, which is in the summertime. So that's why this COVID is not really helping much, because I'm probably not going to have an income this year. Well, I've been doing flowers for, at least over 20 years. I started off working in a garden center here in Bracebridge, and then I worked in flower shops in Toronto for a couple of years, and then I opened up my own flower shop in Toronto with a friend of mine, and I had that for probably 7 years in Toronto. It was #1 rated Toronto, or flower shop in Toronto, so it was pretty cool. And then I moved up here to Muskoka, back to Bracebridge, about, I'm going to say 7-ish years ago, and I've been doing flowers from my studio at home ever since then. But a lot of people want flowers, but they also want to rent, candlesticks, and they want it just to look cohesive throughout. Most people end up hiring a professional wedding planner, but sometimes what we do is we just kind of help some clients, pick a couple of things out as well. But I try to work with the planners, work with the clients, work with the venue, just so it all looks great together.
I looked at Tanya's website before we spoke, and her arrangements are gorgeous. Splats of color everywhere, and the table spreads that she does for weddings, Every single one is so unique. Even after 25 years, she loves just talking about flowers. The way her voice lit up every time she mentioned the word flower or color was heartwarming. She's been lucky enough to be able to make working with flowers her full-time job. The people who you've heard speak today are all ones who have or have at some point relied on weddings for 75 to 100% of their income. And there are many others in Muskoka like that. But because weddings are so seasonal up here, people who work weddings in Muskoka do often also hold down part or full-time jobs. I've personally spoke with many photographers at weddings who have jobs through the week and do shooting for extra income here and there on the weekends. Calligraphers, the people who make the invitations and signage, might only do a dozen weddings per year and then hold down another part-time job. Hair and makeup artists usually own their own studio and pick up weddings on the side to help with overhead costs. Restaurants who cater, the list goes on. Everyone who works weddings part-time does it for a different reason. Maybe they need the extra money because their other job doesn't pay the overhead. Maybe they love cake decorating and wish they could do it full-time, but with weddings being so seasonal, it just doesn't make sense financially. Others are hoping to start working in it full-time, but you've got to start somewhere. Point being, having weddings in Muskoka brings a ton of money to the area and gives hundreds of people work in one way or another.
Weddings and events, I would have to say 98% of the people that I deal with come from Toronto or the surrounding area. Like a lot of people, they're not local for some reason. Almost all of them are from Toronto.
So how have you been affected by COVID with your business so far?
Well, basically, my wedding started in May, and so everything in May and June and July has been postponed till next year so far. I do have some brides hanging on to August and September, like just hoping that perhaps they'll be able to have smaller weddings as opposed to like the larger weddings. So we're kind of just on hold for that. But yeah, I don't have any weddings at the moment, so absolutely zero source of income wedding-wise.
Tanya said last year she worked 44 weddings in 6 months, which was nuts. She only had 3 days off. This year, she only had 20 booked to make it a little easier on herself. She told me if she gets a lot of larger weddings in a season, she'll take on less, and if she gets a lot more smaller weddings, she might take on more. For Tanya, it's extra tough because she's not one of those people that just work weddings part-time. She only does weddings and the odd event. She's been doing it all her life, from the time she started working at a flower shop in Bracebridge, to the flower shop in Toronto, and now a home studio in her garage where she can work on art and arrangements. Lately, she's been trying her hand at a little more pottery, something to keep her busy and sustain that creative flair.
But, I mean, there is some good that comes out of it. I do sell, I don't know if you're familiar with the Annex downtown Bracebridge.
Oh,
it's
yes,
an art studio, and they've got like a coffee shop in there, and I'm doing plants there, so I sell plants and pots, and they do pottery and a whole bunch of like really cool things there. So I was already doing that previously, but I've kind of ramped that up a little bit, like trying to do just to sell plants and pots and everything. And I'm a wannabe potter. I've been doing pottery kind of on the side for a couple of months now, and now I'm just gonna start selling pottery. Apparently, I had really no intentions of doing this, but why not, right?
You know, next year, do you think it's going to be like an extra crazy busy season in 2021?
I do. I think that it's going to be, for a lot of people, it's going to be really busy. I'm already fully booked, so for next year, like all of the weddings, I have to let the people that have clearly booked for this year, they are getting first choice for next year. And I mean, there's a couple people that, you know, it's one of those things, like maybe they realize a big wedding is not exactly what they need. So I think a couple people are getting married this year, like just, you know, either you can get married online or just do a service where it's just, you know, you and your husband kind of a thing, and you get married, and then they might not even get married next year, like a big wedding, right? So it's kind of hard to say. Like, I think it's going to be crazy busy, but there might be a couple people that just decide, hey, I don't need this giant wedding anymore, so I'm not even going to do it. I guess we just have to wait and see. But most people that are in the wedding industry, they're all, I don't know anyone that's not a small business. Like, they're all very limited in what they can do. So there's only so many weddings one person can take. Like, and there's only so many venues that you can get married in. Like, people might choose to do more cottage weddings and whatnot. Maybe there'll be a lot more DIY weddings where they just kind of do their own flowers and do their own, decor and whatnot. That could happen as well. So, and then I have 1 or 2 brides that I'm just providing a bouquet for, just so they can get married at their cottage.
We all know what a wedding is, and maybe a little bit about what it entails, if you've planned one yourself. But unless you're immersed in the industry, they sometimes go over our heads in terms of just how big and frequent they are. Here's Kate Hood again.
There are incredible resorts, so many incredible resorts and venues that solely host weddings for 2 or 3 or 4 months of the year, and then open themselves up beyond that to tourism and sort of resort stays. So I think it's a bit of a hidden industry if you're not immersed in it as a vendor, but it's so significant to my community of people that it's been weird and uncomfortable even listening to how we all are a bit worried about how things are going, or resorts having to rebook and replan for next year. And people are now almost fully booked for their 2021 season because they've had to move all of their 2020 clients over. And so it's, as far as I can tell, as far as it was relevant in my life, it's hugely important economically for a large number of people. The tourism industry is huge, and the wedding industry within that is significant.
Kate and Tanya are both artists, and ones where they get to interact with people in order to be creative. And listening to both of them speak, it was obvious how much they love interacting with people and how passionate they are about their craft. Unfortunately, the pandemic's really put a damper on how they're able to work. They have to find new ways to be creative, ways they'd never even thought about before. Who knows? Maybe all these restraints will help artists find a new flair. Maybe this will give people who work in the wedding industry, heck, the entire seasonal tourism industry, a chance to actually take a bit of a summer off. And maybe they'll come back more refreshed than ever.
I've got tons of hobbies and tons of ideas, so I always figured, if it's got to happen, this has happened for a reason, right? So maybe it's for me to do more pottery, maybe it's for me to sell more plants, maybe it's for me to have a summer off in 35 years, you know what I mean? So who knows, right?
Silver linings.
It's kind of cool to see everybody working together.
Mm-hmm.
And I feel like more people are going to help people that they know, and like I know I personally am trying to do, like online shopping that of places like big box stores, try to shop locally, which is, I should have been doing that regardless, do you know what I mean? But it's, I think people think about things a little bit differently after all of this. It's kind of cool.
It's interesting to think about where we'll be 1 year from now in terms of weddings in Muskoka. I'm also starting to wish I had a crystal ball. Will things be the same? Will there be even more of them next year to kind of get caught up from the ones that couldn't happen this year? Who knows? But it's interesting to think about and talk about with other people who work in it.
I'm actually kind of excited to see how the industry adjusts and recoups from all of this. It's a scary time, but I also think it's an exciting time where there is a great sense of community. People are turning to their local businesses a little bit more and finding there's great innovation and creativity stemming from all of this. So I think it's a really exciting time at the same breath of it being a very uncertain time.
I know where to run. I know where to run. I know where.
Thanks for listening to The Plunge. If you liked it, please share it, rate it, tell your friends, and follow. If you'd like to contact me, I'm on Instagram, just search Jess Kramer, or you can email me directly at jess@sproutproductions.ca. Special thanks to Holly Matrimony for giving me loads of great facts about the wedding industry for this episode, Bryn Armstrong for talking to me about her side of the business, and Tanya and Kate for taking time to speak with me about their business and lives. I'll be back next week for my final episode of the series. Until then, stay safe out there.
Nobody wants to die alone.